So, hi. Smart crowd. Thanks very much. It's really fantastic to be here. So, as Fred mentioned, it's my fourth Heavy Chef talk. The irony is it's the first time I actually talk about what I do for a living, which is what this whole event is about. And I managed to speak quite a bit, and I don't always ship myself, but tonight I really am, because normally, if you don't like what I have to say about social media, for example, well then, you just don't like my opinion on something. At the age 23, I started a presentation company, which was 18 years ago. If you don't like what I have to say tonight, my entire life's work has been for nothing. So there's nothing like that to add a wee bit of pressure. Anyway, the other thing is, when Fred's team messaged me and said, hey, will you do a talk on presentations? I said, cool, no problem. And then he said, what do you want to call it? And I said, how not to suck at presenting. And then I thought, that is a really, really, really crappy platform to set yourself. Because if I do, anyway, so Farron mentioned this the other day, and it's earlier, the other day, as in, just now. And he said, you know, it's quite funny, you talk about death by PowerPoint. And I guess death by PowerPoint is the thing. People talk about it all the time, and they say, it's the bad thing, and you were killed in the boardroom, and all these things. I want to start off by breaking your frame a little bit. And this isn't because this works in the room. This is because what we say to every single person. If you're blaming PowerPoint for a bad message, or blaming PowerPoint for a bad presentation, is like blaming a frying pan for a bad meal, right? It is not, the PowerPoint is not shit. You are shit, okay? There's a little bit of acceptance that has to come in here. PowerPoint is doing its job, minding its own business, sitting there acting like a linear processor. It just sits there, and when you hit click, it goes to the next thing that you created, right? This is like walking up to a canvas, doing a crappy painting, and then saying, shit canvas, okay? You need to stop blaming it. And before you get onto any other fancy tools, if you're not good at the basics, don't go for the advanced driving. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and I guess what today is not going to be about, this feels very loud, eh? That today, are you okay? That this is not going to be about is those standard tips, because you can all Google them. If you Google now 5 tips on being a better presenter, you'll find tons of these things. They all exist everywhere. They're things like this. 5 tips for great PowerPoint presentation. Tell a story. Has anybody not heard that one? Right? Right. First of all, here's a top tip for you. Anytime you want to poll an audience for anything, ask them a question that requires them not to put up their hand. Guys, put up your hands if you've... No, nothing ever. Hands up, everyone here who has not thought about me naked since it started. Thanks, buddy. Hey, you toots. Okay, so tell a story. Stories are fantastic. However, there's a thing to this. My business partner, Don Packett, he's a great guy. He loves wildlife. I can't stand wildlife. I find wildlife really, really boring. I see a zebra, and he says, look, a zebra. And I'm like, I've seen them. I'm familiar. It's black and white. It's a stripy horse. But he gets upset, and so he tries to make the stories interesting. He says, guy, so, because have you ever heard, like, I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, animals are delicious. I'm not judging, but like, wildlife voice. Guys, look over there. Right, in that corner, and he'll say to me, I was in the bush this time, and he starts telling me about how he creeps up on this thing, and this otter was fucking something, and then this happened, and this bird flew over and ate this, and there's nothing he can say to me about wildlife that will make this just not boring for me. I don't care how once upon a time, there was an otter. Dude, you lost me at otter, right? Whereas, me, I like things like tabletop gaming. I understand this is my thing. I like motorbikes. If you put on a really crappy, worst slide you've ever seen on the future trends of tabletop gaming, I would sit and I would listen. Because if I give a shit, I will work through your bad presentation. Telling a story is basically like when you feed your cat or your dog a pill and you wrap it in peanut butter. And you stick it in their mouth, they're like, yeah, ooh, peanut butter. Ah, shit, it's a pill. And that's what you're doing. So but actually, if people are fundamentally interested in what you're saying, this doesn't have to be a big deal. The other thing that people always talk about is this. Know your audience before you're speaking. Right, good idea. Hi. Richard. Good. Hi. Richard. Really difficult. And the other thing is, you can never actually know your audience, right? For all I know, this guy here is wearing women's underwear. And I'm not judging, right? You can never tell. And I've never gone to an audience yet where I can actually know anything about them. The amount of times people say things to me, again, fair and brief. Listen, Microsoft staff, they are quite conservative. I said shit a lot, nobody died. Not one person, am I right? No one died. Okay? And they laughed and they enjoyed it because you know what they do? They go later and they watch the movie The Hangover and they see that little Asian man's willy and they survive. So here's my number one rule for knowing your audience. You can't. But what you can know about your audience is you can know that the one real truth about everything is the only thing that matters is not try to be who they are or who you want them to be, but to be the best version of yourself. Because here's the thing, being liked is not that important when you're presenting. It helps, but what is more important is being believed. And getting believed in what you're talking about comes when you're being authentic. And I never know, I know that some people will hate me today and some people might like me and that's all fantastic. But I'd like to think that everybody believes that I am just being myself and I'm being authentic. And that's the number one rule. And the good news about that is I'm not the best at anything in this audience except for one thing. I'm categorically 100% undeniably the best version of myself in this room. And that's it. And that's what you could ever hope to be. You can stand up in a crowd and know with confidence that you're always absolutely the best version of yourself. Fuck the audience and bring that, right? If you bring the best version of yourself to every talk you'll do, good things will happen. I mean, again, it's like, I guess there are some things you can know. For example, I know that this is a social media type crowd. So when I was putting in slides, I try and make things that work in a tweet. So for example, blaming PowerPoint for bad presentations, like blaming a pan for a crappy meal, with my Twitter name, with @LumiaRSA and with #HeavyChef is 118 characters. You can fit it in a tweet, right? And so I understand knowing your audience to some degree, but it's always detrimental to try and overthink it. I was speaking last year, now I'm a tattooed atheist. I was speaking last year, and you've noticed I sometimes use cuss words. I was speaking in Saudi Arabia. Gee, people were like, dude, those Arabs, they're not gonna like you at all. Be careful. People kept telling me, delete all the porn off your machine before you go to the airport. They scan it, and if they see anything, they cut your tully off. This is the kind. Anyway, I was nervous. I get there. These guys walk up to me. Hey, man, they're swearing left, right, and center. At the end of it, they're all like, "Wah!" Yeah. Not the most conservative crowd you would have thought. Every one of them's in dish dash things and Thorpes and raddest guys ever. Because all they want to be treated like is other people and they want a genuine experience. And so that's this, and that's really what, to me, the first kind of premises are about. I think you can believe these 5 tips, 5 things, you can take them with a pinch of salt, and I think they help. But I think you have to fix other things first. They'll get you further, but they won't get you there. And that's the key. The other thing for me is that we're not actually here today to talk about presentation. What we're here today to talk about is leadership. Because I think it's important, there's an important distinction here. If you go onto Google and you Google managers, you'll find shit like this, right? But if you Google leaders, you'll find things like this. And why presenting is so important is the fundamental difference between a good manager and a great leader is your ability to stand up and get people to go to war for you. Your ability to get a group of people to buy into what you're saying and to think, I want to be with that person. And that's why it's so fundamentally important that this is not about presentation. This is about getting your message across and getting people to buy into it. Our company, Missing Link, we always say that we're not a presentation firm, we're an audience optimization firm. Our job is not to fix the presenter, it's to fix the audience. If you don't leave changed, we have failed. And that's what you have to do. So let's talk about this company for a second, maybe to give you some premise and some background. As mentioned, I started it when I was 23, I'm 41 now. We're one of the world's largest presentation firms, we're the largest in South Africa. We are good, and we always talk not about the work that we do, but more about the presentations and stuff we attend. We've won world's best presentation competition for a SlideShare. Other tool, you guys are familiar with maybe Prezi, right? We won a world global template competition, 10,000 entrants. Now let me just quickly put Prezi to bed, quickly. We won the world's best thingy-mabobby on it, so we know a thing or two about it. If you use it, I'm gonna punch you in the face, okay? Let me give you Prezi as a presentation tip. Prezi using interpretive dance. Hello everybody, thanks very much. I'd like to do a presentation for you today on such and such. Click. By leveraging economies of scale, so then can we, and this is what happens, all the fancy shit happens between slides. So they're taking all the most fancy things and they do it between information. But the information is still crap. Someone's phoning me and it feels so good because it's actually got me on the sphincter. Anyway, but the key is these kind of things. No, I don't think this is as important. I don't think it's important about the things we've won. I think it's important about the presentations we attend. Because it's the stuff that we attend that makes us learn more. And the one thing, I've been to 5 TEDs myself. Pop Tech is amazing. Innotown, Creativity World Forum, 99U. And every time I go to a conference like this, I get the double whammy of both getting to listen to the speakers, but getting to analyze the speakers. What did this person do that made them better? What happened? And this has led to a number of successes for us. In case you don't believe, here is the TED stage. This guy is me. What I particularly love about this image is that this guy now looks like a zombie eating this chick's brains. And she's like, ah! And anyway. But one of the things that came out of this is I've been to 5 TEDs. I was the first South African to speak on the main stage at one of them. I did a presentation called First Impressions Lie. One of our rules of presentation is treat every single one under the premise that your technology will fail you. On the TED stage, first South African ever, I had 3 minutes and the tech stopped working. And I had to wing it. It was cuck. Anyway, so here's the thing, but luckily they invited us back, and I was invited a few years later to train their TED Fellows speaker. So we went through and we were doing some presentation training for their Fellows programs. People like Candy Chang, who did Before I Die. If you've ever seen that TED Talk, I was the coach for that. And in fact, here I am coaching them. In case you're wondering what's going on here, has any of you ever been to Amsterdam? This requires hands up. Who's been to Amsterdam? Right, did you watch people shag? Okay, so good man, I like to see it. So we have one honest person here, all right? So this is this place here. If anyone recognizes, this is this weird elephant where you go, Theatre Casa Rosa. It sounds like a classy place. It's not. People bang in there, okay? Now, I was quite excited because turns out you actually don't get to watch people have sex in real life that often. Anyway, so you can imagine the scene. I walk into this room and I arrive there and this light, I also, don't ever go to the front row. Or if you do, take a plastic bag, okay? But anyway, I walk into this room, and all of a sudden, the lights fade out. And then the spotlight comes on like stage right, like whoosh, and the music starts. And this dude walks in, he's like in a trench coat. He's this weird pedo-looking guy. And the music, and he walks out like, bow, 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 wicka, bow, 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 wicka, oh, and he's going like this, and then he gets to stage right. Now, you must understand, his dong is hanging out as well. All of a sudden, the music, the light goes off him, and then it goes like, whoosh, stage left, and this music starts like, wow, 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 and this woman kind of walks out like, and you're expecting this sexy thing, and she walks out like this, like, and she climbs onto this table like this. And she's sitting there, and this guy, and then the music changes back. So now she's up there like this, and she's on all fours, and you're sitting there, and then this dude walks up behind her, but he's giving us he's like trying to warm up the crowd. Come on, yeah, you want to see this? Get her down, get her down. And he walks, and he starts tapping her like this. And he's really bringing the face, the O face. He's working like a porn star, like, yeah. Now, I was sitting over there, so let me show you the front of her face. She was like, right, I gotta get the kids at 3. I need eggs, milk, flour. Shit, I wonder if Phil can get them from rugby practice. And I'm sitting in the front thinking, I can't masturbate to this. This is the worst thing ever. I actually don't even want to masturbate ever again. And I realized something, so I turned around to my business partner, Tony, who's with me. Also weird watching people have sex with your old business partner. Hey man, this is cool, eh? Anyway, and I said to him, dude, this is exactly like presenting. Because one of the rules of presenting is that your audience can never enjoy receiving a presentation more than you enjoy delivering it. If you're bored of your content and you're delivering it a 3, you need to understand that the best chance your audience have is a 3. But I dig this. So because I enjoy this, I feel I have a slightly better chance of maybe winning you over. Anyway, that's what I told the TED guys. It went well. I was never invited back. But We'll talk a bit more about them later. Here's some of the speakers. There's guys in the room. You can see them when they were presenting, and they did a great job. And we actually made some of the presentations, which was nice. And it was a cool thing. But our payoff line has always been simple, the missing link. It is quite simply, don't hire us because we're fun and interesting. Hire us because you're not. And it's honest, if nothing else. And that's the key, and I guess what we want to do is make people fun and interesting. Not because we think that you have to be flippant, but we think if you're not interesting, you're not memorable. And if you're not memorable, you have failed. There is no content or presentation ever been done ever on any subject that is not supposed to be remembered. That's your job, right? That's how you move the needle. Anyway, I was very, very nervous when Fred said to me, come and do a talk on presentations, and we're giving you about 35, 45 minutes, because we've got a lot to cover here. And I realized that I started off making this presentation, and I have a master deck with about 1,500 content slides in it that I use at talks, and I start and I delete all the ones that are not relevant. And I work in about a slide a minute as a basic rule. And I got back and I was about 150 slides, and I thought, shit, maybe if I speak really, really fast, I can just get these messages across. And it reminded me of a story about this here. Does anybody know what this is? This is pâté de foie gras. Foie gras is a French speciality. It's a pâté, and you get a little bit of bread, and you do it. Now, the problem is, the way that they make foie gras is they force feed geese. Okay, so geese are held, and this isn't weird, unknown stuff. This is pretty much widely accepted exactly how they're made. Now, again, don't get me wrong, I eat animals, I can't take a moral high ground. However, this is what happens. And I read about this in a book called Brain Rules by John Medina, and he had this to say. He said, great for chefs, not great for geese, who are sacrificed in the name of expediency. And I realize this is what we do with every presentation we ever do. We force feed and cram as much information in as we possibly can, because we think you're sitting there. We've got to get this across. We've got to tell you, you've got to leave with this. But it doesn't work that way. To me, the quote could be changed. Great for presenters, not great for audience who are sacrificed in the name of expediency. Because that's what happens. So I realized I can't cram in 100 tips. All I can do is give you a fundamental rule. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to share with you the fundamental structure of a presentation and how we see the world. Because too much information never helps anybody. It is the death and killer of every single presentation. It is not about the information you give. It is about the information that they remember. And your best chance of making them remember 3 points is delivering them 3 points. Because if you give them 100, they'll still remember 3, but they may not be the ones that you choose. So that's where we're going. So I started realizing something about presentations a few years back, and I realized that there are infinite departure points leading into every prezo you will ever give. Infinite places that it can come from. Turns out though, there are very limited destinations. In a presentation, you want to arrive at the end of it in one of 6 places. You want to educate, galvanize, persuade, provoke, comfort, or inspire. Sometimes you want to do 2 of these at the same time. But ultimately, presentations aren't that complex. Because if anybody does want this, I'll give it to Fred and you can download it. You don't have to take notes. You're more than welcome to any of it. But the truth is that we actually don't have to, it's not that difficult because there's a structure. So we figured this out, then we thought, what if we can make the formula for this, for each one of these? Instead of having to make new presentations every time. Everyone likes bespoke, right? You know what bespoke is? You go, you get a suit made, and you get cut, and it gets made for you, and it fits you perfectly. People want presentations like that as well. Turns out though, I went for a suit. I went to the Savile Row. You know what the guy did? He asked me, do you want this for evening wear or for work? I said, a bit of both, cool. Do you prefer a double-breasted or this? Do you prefer this at the next thing? And then he showed me 3 suits that he already had. And he asked me, which one do you like best? Do you know what bespoke was? Making the sleeves fit. Not building a suit. They don't start and say, right, bespoke, fuck, okay, let's get my sewing machine and start sewing. We're getting very weird. but that's not it. So I thought, I can do this with presentations. So we started trying to plot the formula for each one. And then we realized it's even easier than that. Because even within this construct, it's still not that complicated. Turns out, we have this thing called the Prezzo Give and Tell, which works for every single presentation you will ever give. And every presentation from me can be broken down into 4 steps. 4 steps. Step number 1, give them a reason to care. Why should you give a shit about what I'm telling you today? If we can clarify that, you'll work through anything trying to find an answer. Step number 2, give them a reason to believe. Why am I a credible source for what I've just spoken to you about? So early on, I spoke to you about the importance of presentation and being a leader and doing these things. I gave you a reason to care, I hope. Then I spoke to you about some of our credentials, one of the largest in the world, trained TED speakers. I gave you a reason to believe. You know, we all talk about this selling principle called a USP. You know what that is? Unique selling proposition. But before you introduce your unique selling proposition, your reason to believe, you have to introduce a UPS, which is the unique problem only you can solve. If I can introduce a problem that only I can solve for you, then when I talk about me as an authority figure, you're only buying from me. So reason to care, reason to believe. Then tell them what they need to know, give them the information, and then, and this is important, tell them what they need to do. Because you have to leave here with an action. If I want to move you, the easiest way to do that is to tell you where I want you to go. This step, these 4 steps are the structure for every presentation you will ever do. Let me maybe start and break them down a little bit. Have you heard this quotation? I've actually said this before in a room here. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Shittest quote ever. Ever. Why would anybody do that? Hey, horse. And the horse is just looking at you like, dude, what? No. You know what's far easier? Thirsty horses. Find thirsty horses. Do you know how much work you have to do to get thirsty horses to drink? Nada. Nothing whatsoever. Your job is one of 2 things. Either A, find horses that are thirsty, or B, make horses thirsty. And that's your job at the beginning of every presentation. How do I make you thirsty for something that I'm about to tell you? How do I create an itch that your brain wants to scratch? If you can get that right, you're already winning. I remember I was at TED in, I think it was 2009, and I saw this guy speak. His name is Garrick Israelian. Israelian? Right. I mean, you guys really have to choose Brent. Israelite, Israeli, Israelian. Anyway, and you too as well. Right, so here's the thing. So this guy speaks, and he speaks about spectrography. Not big in my line of topics. I don't know if you can see some of his slides behind. That's actually a graph of data that you're supposed to follow. Anyway, this guy does a talk for 18 minutes about gas. Now, I find gas humorous as much as the next guy, but he went to this detail, and then he spoke about telescopes that can see gas. I mean, I was riveted. And he went through this whole presentation and about this telescope and this rotation, and he did these formulas of weirdness, and then he finished the whole thing, and the entire audience is on Twitter or checking things, and then he finishes this whole presentation and he says, and that's how I can categorically prove to you within 10 years if there is alien life on another planet. And I'm like, come on, open with that. Had he stood up there and said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here today on the TED stage here in Edinburgh in 2019. And now he's broken your frame. This isn't 2019. What's going on? When you can break somebody's frame early, it's a good thing. So now you're listening. He says, I'm here today to tell you that finally, with absolute certainty, we can answer the question, is there life on another planet? I have the answer for you today as a TED audience. It's a world first. And of course, the answer to that question is, but I'm getting ahead of myself. You see, this journey started in 2009 on the TED stage, when I was standing on this very stage and I told these guys a story. Let me elaborate. And then he goes into his presentation. Now, fucks are given. Right? Now, somebody I challenged on Twitter that would only drop the F-bomb twice, so I've used both of them. So anyway, we run out. But here's the thing, now you care. Now they've bought into you, or you don't, but then you won't listen. But now they've given you a fighting chance. And this is where I talk about story not mattering. Because if you care about the end result, you'll work through whatever they're having to say to get to the good stuff. And that's what they fail to do. You see, people make mistakes with audiences. I can look at you guys and I can see that you're here. And I can hear that the microphone works, so I can assume that you're listening. But it doesn't work that way. We always talk about the breaks you have to bring and why you have to make slides. A lot of people say, don't bother using slides, just talk. Slides are not just here for me, slides are here for you. Because you need something to hook you to constantly bring your attention back. I always say that an audience is a bit like one of these, like the piece of paper here. And I'm the typist. And I can start talking. And as I'm talking, it's typing away on the page. And every now and then I can look at my audience and I can see, you're still here. So I assume you must still be paying attention. But at this point, if I just carry on talking, it becomes like this blur. You know, remember what happened? If you carry on typing, when that carriage reaches the end, it becomes this blur. And that's when your speaker starts sounding like Charlie Brown. Like the Charlie Brown teacher. No, every now and then what you have to do is you have to wake your audience up. You have to stop and go to reset them. And funny enough, that's where slides work. Because slides draw you back to the screen. Every time I'm talking to you, if you ever want to do a presentation with no slides, just make a bunch of images with big, pretty colors on them. And every single time you feel that you want to bring the audience back, change the color of the slide. And you know what will happen? People will look up. The weatherman does this so well. Think about the weather guy, that guy Graham Hart. Hello, South Africa, blah, 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 blah. Talk, 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 talk. We've got a thing through here, and we've got this cold front passing up through this thing. And then when he wants you to listen again, what does he do? He crosses the screen. Right, now everyone's looking at me. And then he says, blah, 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 and he goes, and you're looking there again. And then it's back to me. And so you've got to make those changes. People make those changes. There's one exception, and I actually want to show you him now. I fundamentally believe that any presentation with visual aids is better than a presentation without. But there's an exception to this rule, and I'm going to demonstrate why he's the exception. The exception is my favorite speaker on the planet. I'm not going to suggest he's the best, but I will say he's my favorite. I actually commented about him in one of Mike's recent blog posts. Can anybody guess who that would be? No, fair enough. The guy's name is Malcolm Gladwell. Right, and here's a little clip of him speaking. Watch, now this man has no slides, but watch how he does his slide changes.
And the US military spends $1.5 billion in 1940 dollars developing the Norden Bombsight. And to put that in perspective, the total cost of the Manhattan Project was $3 billion. Half as much money was spent on this Norden Bombsight as was spent on the most famous military-industrial project of the modern era. And there were people, strategists within the US military, who genuinely thought that this single device was going to spell the difference between defeat and victory when it came to the battle against the Nazis and against the Japanese. And for Norden as well, this device had incredible moral importance, because Norden was a committed Christian. In fact, he would always get upset when people referred to the bombsight as his invention, because in his eyes, only God could invent things. He was simply the instrument of God's will. And what was God's will? Well, God's will was that the amount of suffering in any kind of war be reduced to as small amount as possible, right? And what did the Norden bombsight do? Well, it allowed you to do that. It allowed you to bomb only those things that you absolutely needed and wanted to bomb. So in the years leading up to the Second World War, the US military buys 90,000 of these Norden bombsights at a cost of $14,000 each, again in 1940 dollars. That's a lot of money. And they train 50,000 bombardiers in how to use them. Long, extensive, months-long training sessions, because these things are essentially analog computers. They're not easy to use, right? And they make every one of those bombardiers take an oath to swear that if they're ever captured, they will not divulge a single detail.
And this is what Gladwell does. Gladwell draws you in. He talks quietly, and he talks to you for a while, and he tells you about these stories. But then he changes, and he draws you up, and he speaks, and he takes you on a journey. And he takes you to a point until he's ready to let you down again, and he draws you back in by telling you the story. And he uses that pitch with perfection to draw his audience back into what he's talking about, time and time and time again. The beauty is he chooses the pace of his presentation perfectly. I learned this from a guy called Simon Woodruff years ago. I worked with, probably don't know, I used to be a roadie. I used to tour with many bands. These two guys, Simon and Patrick Woodruff, two brothers, turned rock and roll into what it is today. Simon was a stage design expert and Patrick was the lighting designer. I toured with his brother with Phil Collins and Rolling Stones. And Patrick, I was doing a speaking gig with this guy. He founded a thing called Yo Sushi. Has anybody ever seen that orange Yo Sushi when you go to UK? And he wrote my favorite business book, or one of my favorite business books, called The Little Book of Yo. And I was speaking with him once, very early, when one of my first few talks, and he said, "You're very excited, but you exist here the whole time. And if you only stay at one level the whole time you're speaking, your audience doesn't know how to change. They don't go on a journey with you, and your importance is to change this journey." And I find there's many cues to do that. One cue might be using a video, giving your audience a break from who you're speaking. Another cue would be changing your tonality. But another cue is changing your slides. And I want to drive this home because I do believe that slides are an accessible tool to any of you. I'm not against text on a slide. I understand the value of it, and I'll show you some that are only text in a few minutes. But I think that the idea of a tool to help anchor your audience and to draw them back is fundamentally important. Funnily enough, the one thing Gladwell did with his journey that was wrong, and I want to show you the ending of his talk, and then discuss a little bit about what I thought in this particular talk didn't work so well, and I'll explain to you why.
I have not described to you a success story, right? I described to you the opposite of a success story. And this is the problem with our infatuation with the things we make. We think that things we make can solve our problems, but our problems are much more complex than that. The issue isn't the accuracy of the bombs you have. It's how you use the bombs you have, and more importantly, whether you ought to use bombs at all. Right? There's a postscript to the story of Carl Norden and his fabulous bombsight, and that is on August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber, right, called the Enola Gay flew over Japan, and using a Norden bombsight, dropped a very large thermonuclear device on the city of Hiroshima. And as was typical with the Norden bombsight, the bomb actually missed its target by 800 feet. But of course, it didn't matter, right? And that's the greatest irony of all when it comes to the Norden bombsight. The Air Force's $1.5 billion bombsight was used to drop its $3 billion bomb, which didn't need a bombsight at all. Meanwhile, back in New York, no one told Carl Norden that his bombsight was used over Hiroshima. He was a committed Christian. He thought he had designed something that would reduce the toll of suffering in war. It would have broken his heart. Thank you.
What Gladwell did is he took his audience to a beautiful place and then held their hand and walked them down. He took them down to a sad point in the story. Now, I was in the room that day, and that day, I actually once wrote a tweet that said, TED audiences give out standing ovations like pedophiles give out sweeties, right? Because that's what they're like. They'll stand for anything. They are the most excited crowd you will ever see. And in fact, I've even got a bit of a sub-presentation for you. This is a mini bonus micro-presentation. It's called How to Get a Standing Ovation at TED, right? And it's very easy. I can sum the entire thing up. You could write a book on it, but it would be a very short book because it's very simple. Talk about Africa and or cry, right? If you do those two things, people at TED will stand and cheer for you. They love this because it's a group of capitalists who've just spent 50,000 Rand to sit in a room listening to non-capitalists and trying to be guilty by association. Oh, sweat your philanthropy on me so I can feel like less of a shit, right? But this is what happens. But Gladwell got it slightly wrong on that day because he took them on a downward journey when they wanted to be taken up. And bizarrely, without a doubt, the most talented speaker of the entire day got a smattering of applause because people didn't know how to deal with it. And when you present, one of the things you fundamentally need to do is decide where you want to leave your audience. What I can tell you this is your number one job is to leave them at a better place that you got them. The easy way to do that is to control that. If you're worried that the ending of your presentation is not going to be super high, well then start at a lower base. Start at a place where when they end, if they start on a 3 and you can leave them at a 4, you're still winning. That's your job. Your job is the journey, and if you've not plotted the journey, and you've only plotted the desired outcome for you, then you failed. Because your job is to optimize your audience. That's the key here. And that's what I think, well, I think Gladwell doesn't care. But I think that's what he ignored on the day. Now, I thought because it's a largely marketing group here today, I thought I would share with you some presentation stuff that isn't about presenting itself. It's actually about something different and something that we use when we do pitch consulting. Because I imagine a lot of you have managed to or have had to sit in a pitch at some stage, right? And one of the important things, one of the easy quick wins I want to talk to you about today is the difference between primacy versus recency. Is anyone familiar with these concepts? So, in a court case, in a study in the United States done with lawyers using court cases, they wanted to study the psychological effects of two factors. One was the primacy factor and one was the recency factor. So what they did is they took students and they sat them in a mock courtroom, and they made them sit and watch a trial. And these guys had to watch this trial and watch how it would go and watch how it would progress. And at the end, they had to deliberate on that trial, and they had to decide for the defendant or for the prosecution who was right and who was wrong. Now, they did two different things in this instance. In one, they presented both sides of the story, they did this, and then they asked the guys to take a little bit of time to deliberate. So they had a week, and then a week later, they came back and they said, who do you find for? But in another example, what they did is they said, let's do this presentation, and then let's decide immediately. Go away, come back in an hour, and tell us who won. Now, I want to demonstrate this for you here. So, you have this decision tree here, and what happened? On the one, you had the pro team presenting, then you had the con team presenting, and then you had a gap. If there was a gap, they found for the pro team. Now, to check that that wasn't just the pro team, the prosecutor did a better job, they then did the case again with the same gap, but this time they changed the order of who would present their closing remarks first. Now they asked the con team to present first, and then they asked the pro team to present. And then they found, after a week, for the con team. However, this all changed when they went to, well, this is now the primacy effect. In this case, when people have a long time to deliberate, they will far prefer the content they got first. Now, when I speak to people and I ask them, when are you pitching? Do you know where you are in the running order? Everybody always believes that it's best to go either first or last, but no one's ever sure why. And I believe that you can fundamentally engineer this process. And we've cheekily managed to win a bunch of pitches by doing just this, and I'll explain to you now. Because on the flip side, when the gap was different, what they then did is the pro team presented, then the con team presented, and then there was a short period of time between the decision, and then they found for the con team. And when they flipped it around again, when the con team presented, then the pro team, they found for the pro team. Because when people are making a decision very, very rapidly, it is the team that presents the information last that is most important. So how do you use this? Here's what we do. I phone the client and I say, thanks very much, we'd love to come and do a pitch. Just in terms of our production scheduling, could you let us know how soon after we do our presentation will you be making your decision? And if the client turns around and says, look, we're in a huge rush, we'll make a decision by the Wednesday, you're presenting on the Tuesday, then I say, oh, it's a presentation on the Tuesday. Guys, this is so important to our business that I would really like to do the presentation myself. Unfortunately, I'm speaking in Cape Town in the morning. I will cancel my other arrangements and I will fly back to make sure that I can be in the pitch. Unfortunately, I'll only be able to get there about 4:30. Is there any way we can make that work? And they're like, sweet, thanks, brother. And I'm like, yeah, in it to win it. And we do that. On the flip side, the exact same equation. Oh, no, we're making a decision in a week. When are the pitches starting? Monday morning. Oh, I've got this international thing. I'm afraid I'm flying to London in the afternoon, but I would really love, this is so important. And you're basically like, I would really love. Sherry, you okay, Heidi? That's okay. Yeah. Too much? And you're basically, yes, you're giving them a bit of a rubbing, but all clients want you to do that. Every client basically wants you to go up to them and go, right? But that's what you do. And you're speaking to them and you're telling them these things, and then you're asking for one little favor in return. May I please speak first? And invariably they'll turn around to you and say to you, no problem whatsoever. Because actually it turns out that when it comes, and this is the recency effect, when it comes to presentations, when you present is almost as important as what you say and how you say it. You need to pick your moments. And I didn't want to go into too much content heavy stuff here. I wanted to talk more about structure. But I think it is important and valuable for you to understand this, because this is something you can change immediately. This is a rule that you can put into place tomorrow when you're invited to pitch. Whereas a lot of the detailed stuff is just things that you have to remember. It's that fragua approach. So it's about this kind of thing, and it's about these thinkings and these presentation steps that we have to go through. And I thought to finish off, I would tell you a story from history, because I love history. I think you can learn so much for it. I think we spend far too much time looking at the future, and I think the history is a lot more interesting and it's a lot better to analyze. And I thought what I would do is to close off here today, and then we can open for questions and ask anything. I thought what I would do is I would tell you a historical story that puts this into place and gives you context on this entire structure. Now, does anybody know who this guy is here? Oh, sorry. This is a guy here called Bernard Cornwall. This guy here is Ned Stark. I think he's Ned Stark. His name is Sean Bean. Now, Bernard Cornwall is my favorite author of all time. And he writes a series of books called the Sharpe series. And what it was is he went through the period of time in the Napoleonic Wars, and he wanted to follow one specific character. The problem was he felt that the character in and of himself wasn't that interesting. And nobody really wants to read a history book. So what he created is a character, Richard Sharpe, played in the series by Sean Bean, to be this whore's son, rogue Londoner, who joined the army and somehow found his fate intertwined with this general, so that he could tell the general's story in an interesting way. And so what happened is that they created this entire series of books. I think my collection is probably this wide on them, and I've got encyclopedias specifically around them. And I want to tell you about one specific battle in this period of time. Now, the character that this book centers around were not Richard Sharpe. The real character is this guy here. Who knows who this guy is? So here's the thing. This guy's name is Arthur Wellesley, or Wellesley, some people say, but it's Arthur Wellesley, and he's the Duke of Wellington. Now, this guy, you always see him, he's always looking forward. They called him Old Bernie or Old Nosy because he had a very big, awkward nose, and he was always had a big issue about it. So, but he was an amazing general. Now, does anybody know who this guy is here? Who's this guy? So everybody knows Napoleon. Now, granted, Napoleon had a better PR department, right? So Napoleon knew his shit. But here's the thing, the interesting thing about Napoleon. The world remembers Napoleon. We refer to that period of time as the Napoleonic Wars. But there's a quote that says, history is always written by the victors. You've heard that. So we always tell the story about the victors, and yet in this instance this wasn't true. You see, Arthur Wellesley beat Napoleon on every single battle that they ever went in. All through the peninsula, all through Portugal and Spain, Wellesley, and actually he met Napoleon's marshals, Marshal Soult and all these guys, and everywhere they battled, they won. Not because Wellesley was better at strategy and absolute big war strategy, but because he was a tactical guy. So Wellesley used to fight in a line versus Napoleon, who would fight in a column. To give you context of that, fighting in a column was when you took 60 people and you lined them up 6 or 7 in the front, and they were in rows and rows and rows, so they looked like a big rectangle. Now, columns were very powerful against cavalry. The war in that time was a game of rock, paper, scissors. You had 3 things. You had cavalry, you had infantry, and you had artillery. And what these guys would do is they would try and create these things to best fight against what they were hoping to come across. And the most lethal thing known at the time was the cavalry. So Napoleon used to march into every battle in a column. The problem with a column is 90% of your soldiers can't shoot, because they're standing behind other soldiers. And what they would do is walk into war waiting for the guy in front of them to die. Now, Wellesley, what he did is he fought in a line. He took 2, sometimes 3 soldiers in a row, and he lined them up all the way across this room. Now, these guys were vulnerable to cavalry, but because the cavalry could come in, but they were artillery wasn't a big deal for them because it was very hard to aim for these 3 guys. Now, the best thing about this is when you're walking and fighting, you shoot, you go down, you reload, and the other guy comes behind you and he shoots. So this whole battle, all of a sudden, this guy, this uninteresting guy, Wellesley, who wasn't nearly as good at strategy as Napoleon, started kicking Napoleon's ass. And they went around until they went to Belgium to a famous battle called Waterloo. Now, in Waterloo, Wellesley was severely outmanned. He had 20,000 less people, less men, less soldiers than Napoleon. But more importantly, a lot of his soldiers were made up of guys from all different countries. And he felt that he could only trust two groups, the British Redcoats and the Prussians. He also had a green-coated rifle brigade, and I'll maybe talk a little bit about them in a second. But the key was, he had a huge disadvantage. The 2 days before, Wellesley was at a ball, he was dancing, he knew Napoleon was coming, but he didn't think anything would happen that quickly. And he was standing there dancing, and Napoleon won a couple of decisive battles that gave him control of the battlefield. So now Wellesley's arriving with 20,000 people less into a battlefield where the other guy got to choose where he's standing. He should have lost. Now, Napoleon's an interesting guy because Napoleon was very smart, and one of the best business lessons from him was how he saw strategy. He said the problem with most people's strategy is they get dogmatic to it. Napoleon famously would wait in every morning to a battle. He would walk up there and he would say, okay, I have my strategy, you have yours. He would say, charge, and then he would go and have breakfast. And he would sit and he would eat at the beginning while everyone was fighting. And what he would do is he would wait till all the dispatches came back at lunchtime when everybody's died. Because he said, the person who wins, when your strategy collides with my strategy, shit happens. The person who can best analyze and create a new strategy out of the mix is the person who wins. Now in business, we often stay too dogmatic to our own one. And this is what Napoleon did. But there was something that happened at Waterloo that changed the rules. You see, Wellesley knew that he couldn't win the battle on force of strategy. He couldn't win it on force of men. So he had to win it in a different way. Now, I often think when we speak to leaders of businesses, they always talk about how they want to tell their 2020 vision to their staff about making 5 billion by 2020. And we say, why are you telling your people? And they say, because they need to know. And this is like people talking government language to citizens. We don't need to know every detail. What we need to know is what we have to do. And this is what Wellesley did well. You see, what Wellesley did is he realized that in the time, these guys all fought with these muskets, front-loading breech musket. And he realized that the standard accepted measure at the time was if you could shoot 3 shots per minute. That the French could shoot 3 shots per minute, and the British could shoot 3 shots per minute. So what he did is everybody would sit there and they'd work out how many shots do we need, how many balls do we need, what do we need to do, how can we reload. And what Wellesley did was he did a bit of a presentation. And he decided to change the rules. And what he did was he said the following. He said, gentlemen, you are going to die. The French outnumber us. The French have won. We are now facing Napoleon for the first time. We have never faced this master of strategy. His troops outnumber us. His cavalry outnumbers us, and he has more guns than we have. It is likely that all of us die here today. But I want you to have faith. Because people have said we will die the entire way through Spain, and people have said we will die the entire way through Portugal, but we did not die. We prevailed. We beat Napoleon's men at every step in the way. And let me explain to you the problem. The problem is Napoleon is caught with blah, 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 gets into some detail, and he comes back and he says, but there is a weakness. And the weakness is that Napoleon's men can shoot 3 shots per minute. So my men, I ask you one thing. I ask you to practice and change and train, and I ask you to do one thing, and that is shoot 4 shots per minute. This is the most ridiculous game-changing strategy in history of warfare. Because if you imagine these guys, they take out that pole, they bite, they spit, they load that ball into the front, they prime it, they take it back, they spit and pour the gunpowder on there, and they lift it up. And they've accepted that they can only do that 3 times in a minute, which is already a feat. At the end of Waterloo, Wellesley's men, many of whom were said to be able to do it 5 shots per minute. Now I want you to understand the difference. When you're walking towards troops and everything is happening on time, if one group can break time, everything changes, chaos happens. Because every time Napoleon's men bent down, by the way, Napoleon's men were now also fighting in a line. Every time Napoleon's men bent down and the one guy was reloading and the other guy was going, the British troops were already firing again. 25,000 Frenchmen died at Waterloo versus 7,000 British people, in spite of all the advantages they had. Why? Because Napoleon gave a good speech. He started with giving them a reason to care. You will die. He then gave them a reason to believe. We have beaten them already. You have followed me to victory. He then told them what they needed to know. The French can only shoot 4 shots per minute. and 3 shots per minute. And finally, he taught them how to fire that 4th shot. That won the battle. And that is the structure of presentation I think you need to know. And in that story, I hope you've enjoyed today. I hope you try to think what that 4th shot will be. And I hope you don't suck at presenting. Thank you very much.